My name is Christine Bonner, and the reason I was a part of an inquest was I lost my son Darren in 2007 in Afghanistan. I didn't have any prior knowledge to what was going on at the inquest or what it was going to be about. I just knew that at some point I would find out how my son died.
I'm Kerry Chelsea. My son was Jason Chelsea. He died aged 19. His death was classed as an accidental death.
Well, Keith and Veronica Bateman, and we're the mum and dad of Lance Corporal James Bateman, 2nd Battalion Parachute Regiment, who was killed in Afghanistan on the 12th of June 2008.
I felt nervous and anxious about the coroner's inquest, but absolutely desperate to know the circumstances whereby James had been killed.
My name's Helen Gray, and on the 13th of April in 2007, my son Christopher, who served with the Royal Anglian Regiment, the Vikings, was killed in Afghanistan. All the time that Christopher was growing up, I was there. And for the first time in his life, when I felt he needed me the most, I wasn't there. So I needed to know. I needed to know that they did everything possible to save him.
Hello, how do you do? Hello. I'm Alistair Goulden. I'm with the Defence Inquest Unit.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
And I'm so sorry about your son.
Thank you.
Think seriously about what you want to know. Think about what questions are in the back of your mind for all these months leading up to it. This is your one opportunity to ask those questions. It's no good going away afterwards thinking, I wish I'd have asked such and such a thing. Go there and try and get those questions asked, because it's too late later on.
At first, I thought we was getting investigated, as if we'd done something wrong, to be honest. The family showed me the letter, and it says on the letter it's just to confirm how they died and what happened exactly.
As soon as someone dies on operations, straight away, when we get back off the ground, we do learning accounts, we find out exactly what happened. And then a little while later, if there has been a fatality in our unit, the police will come, even if we're in a remote area. These statements will then be used in an inquest approximately a year to a year and a half later. I think myself and the others in the unit realised that an inquest was just for everyone to put their mind at rest and to say this is what happened, whether it be enemy fire, explosion, etc. Because it's okay, all the soldiers knowing their part of the story. It's a coroner piecing all those together for the family. So it's the inquest's job to say this is exactly what happened, because it could be hard for the family hearing loads of different snippets from different soldiers.
An inquest is an inquiry in public to determine and record the answers to 4 questions: who the deceased is, when and where he died, and by what means he came by his death. Everybody in the whole of England and Wales is entitled to attend any inquest they want to, because the whole point of an inquest is that it's held in public and that everyone who wants to know what happened has a chance to come and listen and ask questions. From a coroner's point of view, there's no difference between an operational death and a non-operational death, except that we may need to be more aware of the possibility of certain information not being publicised. But apart from that, there's no difference. I think that some families think they're entering adversarial proceedings, and I think many lawyers try and make it into an adversarial proceeding, and that is totally and utterly wrong. Everybody at an inquest, that's the family, all the witnesses, all the lawyers, all the coroners, are working to the same end. All of us should simply be finding out what happened, not who's to blame, simply what happened.
When I found out about the inquest, it was just a letter. I just received a letter, and I was asked if I would go to the inquest, Darren's inquest. I didn't know what to do or what to say or who to ask about any of it, really. We had a letter from the coroner about 2 to 3 weeks before, whereby he actually said that if we wanted to go and read any statements in his office, we could and were able to do so. And we were able to do so because he was actually based in our hometown.
Well, the first we heard was that we received a letter in the post to attend. That was a year after Matthew's death. So there's very, very little information to tell you what to expect, when you know, what sort of building that you're going to. When you're inside, it's like a court. You don't know that. You really rely on your own research of trying to find any information you can as to what to expect.
When the coroner contacted me about the inquest, I was quite shocked. I didn't realise... I mean, I knew there'd be a sort of inquest, but I didn't know exactly what it would involve. I only found out who was going to be there a month before the inquest actually took place, and that was because they sent me all the paperwork, copies of all the information that had been gathered and everything.
I was still, I suppose, in shock a little bit, and my memory was really bad. And Joe and my sister kind of dealt with everything on the run-up to the inquest.
Well, we were given an information pack to explain the procedures that would go through. The information pack itself was quite extensive, but it seemed that one or two phone calls may have been, explain it verbally as well, might have been helpful.
You definitely need somebody to run through how a coroner's court works, so you have an idea of the questions that you can ask yourself and ask witnesses, and just to brief you of what's going to happen, so that you just don't go in and be bewildered by the whole process.
Hello, Mrs. Thorpe. Mr. Thorpe. Let me introduce myself. I'm Edward Ashley. I'll be the coroner at this inquest. Thank you so much for coming in earlier. Did you have a good trip here?
The traffic wasn't as bad as we thought. We've been here a while, though. But...
Yes, I apologise for being in this room. In fact, normally we would be in the court itself where the inquest will in fact take place, but the court's being used today, so do bear with me on this one. Now, I often find it very valuable for members of the family to attend a pre-inquest meeting, and the purpose of this is to acquaint you with who will be giving evidence and what the inquest will be covering. You have to remember that this inquest is for your benefit, so it's important that you know what we'll be covering and what its purpose is. All right?
We had actually been invited to Loughborough to go and have a look around the court, the coroner's court, by a lovely gentleman, and we met the people, some of the people that were going to be involved.
We actually met the coroner himself briefly, but then he just handed us a file of statements, and I suppose we spent about 2 hours reading them. It's about as much as we could take, really, but there was a lot of detail there. But I found that prepared us quite nicely for the inquest, actually, because we had some idea what was coming.
Before attending the inquest, I received my statement, which I'd made a couple of days after the actual event took place. I found it very helpful because that gave me a bit of a reminder as to how the events of the day, what took place on that day, and it gave me a better understanding of what happened.
This was the first inquest that I'd attended. The Defence Inquest Unit had sent out quite a comprehensive document outlining the procedures during the inquest and what I could expect in terms of questioning.
The preparations I made for the inquest was just to basically go over my statements to make sure it was clear in my head exactly what was on the statements, because that's exactly what I give in Afghanistan at the time.
On the morning when we arrived, we had to be there for 9 o'clock, and obviously the television crews were outside, and my pulse rate was shot up, my heart was beating. It's like you don't want to be there. You don't want to hear, but you need to hear. You need to find out. It's really strange. You didn't want that. I wanted that day to come for 2 years, and then I didn't want it to be that day. I'd rather have been anywhere else than there on that day. But I was going to say, a lot of people there. We went inside, and obviously the military were there waiting for us. And then we got taken up to the room first.
I went into the actual building, and I didn't know where I had to go. I just sort of followed my senses really to the nearest place, and then found the major there waiting, and there were some other soldiers in there too, which I didn't realise at the time were the lads that were with Darren when he died.
Mrs. Thorpe?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Tim Palmer. I was Mark's company commander in Afghanistan.
Oh, yes, he talked about you.
He was an excellent soldier. I was very proud to command him. I don't know if you've met these two, but they were in Mark's company on the same operation when he was killed. This is Sergeant Grimmett.
Madam. Sir.
And this is John Dixon, who left us for Civvy Street last year.
Did you have far to come?
I had a bit of an early start, but it was important to be here. Matt was a close friend. We trained together. And I know he would have done anything for me.
Most people have never been to an inquest, and it's quite frightening because it's like being called to court, and people have got their own perception of what a court is going to be like, and they're quite nervous about it. When we speak to witnesses, try to put them at their ease, and tell them basically that the coroner will be asking questions of fact of them, and they're to tell the truth, be clear, and answer those questions that the coroner puts to them.
If you haven't had the chance to meet the families before the inquest, it's very important that you go up and introduce yourself before going into the courtroom. The families will appreciate that, and also it will reduce your nerves and apprehension when you're giving your evidence.
I think there's a great benefit to meeting Matthew's colleagues before we went in court, because you can put a name to the face of the learning report that you've read, so it just breaks the ice rather than them and us, which we felt came across a lot. So I think it is important that, yes, you just shake hands and say hello.
When we arrived at this court, we walked round it twice trying to find the front door, because it's a very old building, very dark and dismal. However, having said that, some of Jamie's mates were inside, and of course immediately came up and spoke to us.
First got there, the company commander was waiting outside. He met us, handed us the envelopes of our statements in.
Hi, I'm Alistair.
We went for a cup of coffee around the corner, so it was about an hour early. Read through them, and that's what he talked us a bit about us. And then took us to meet this colonel, who sat us down and talked us through the process.
OK, guys, when you come into court, you'll be sitting in these seats here with the other witnesses. The family will be on the bench just in front of this bench here. Coroner sits up on the seat at the top. When you give evidence, you'll give your evidence...
I actually knew the families very well beforehand, and I developed a good relationship with them. So I wasn't apprehensive about seeing the families. I think I was more apprehensive about giving my statement in front of them.
If they see the family for the first time, it's probably hard. They might think, who is this family? You know, who are these? Are they reporters? Are they experts? But by seeing the family there, it's still hard. I've heard comments of them and us. It is because the soldiers do not know what to say. You know, to them, they know it's for the family, but they feel, what do you say to the family? So it's normally just a nod and, you know, explaining who you are again.
If young soldiers are giving evidence at an inquest, then it would be, I would just say to them, don't be afraid to speak to the parents, because the parents feel that part of their son is there because they were the last people to see them. And what they had to say to them was very, very precious.
It is good to speak to the soldiers before, and I would say to everybody that's going to go through an inquest, try and speak to the lads that were out there with your son or your daughter or your husband, talk to them, you find out so much from them, and you become very close with them because you know they were the last ones to be with your son at the time.
Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready to make your way into court? If you'd like to come this way.
I'm sometimes asked why everybody in court stands when the coroner appears.
Please be upstanding for Her Majesty's coroner.
When that happens, it isn't out of respect for the coroner.
Please, sit down.
It's entirely out of respect for the Queen. Usually, the coroner sits slightly raised from everyone else. That's not to show that he's important, it's simply to show that he is the figurehead of authority. I repeat, coroners are very ordinary people. In front of him usually sits the family, and they usually are given the best seats in court so that they can see and hear the witnesses. The witness box is usually up at the front of the court, near where the coroner's sitting, so that when the witness is giving evidence, everybody can see the witness and hear the witness. The press are usually tucked away at the back of the court. They're usually as near to the door as I can get them, and that's because the press tend to come in and out of court. Then all the witnesses tend to sit together at the back. People sometimes think that that may cause trouble because witnesses come from different angles, but that isn't the case at an inquest because everybody is on the same side. It isn't a trial. Everyone is there for the same purpose. There are occasions when some people at the inquest are represented by lawyers and others aren't. Sometimes the Ministry of Defence are represented by lawyers. That shouldn't cause any concern at all to the families. The coroner still runs the court. The purpose remains exactly the same. The Ministry of Defence may feel that they need a lawyer present in case something secret comes up, which they think should be kept out of court, and they really need to know that beforehand so that they can put it to the coroner. But generally speaking, it shouldn't cause any concern at all. There are cases where a coroner sits with a jury. It would be, to my mind, unusual for an inquest into the death of a soldier to be heard with a jury. However, coroners have the right to call a jury whenever they think it's appropriate. Coroners' facilities vary enormously. In Birmingham, I'm lucky that I've got a purpose-built court, but other coroners aren't as fortunate, and they have to borrow other people's courts, and sometimes they have to borrow a village hall. When that happens, then the facilities can be very, very poor. And that's one of the reasons why I always tell families, go to an inquest before the inquest that you're actually involved in. So you can go there and you can hear what happens and you can see what facilities are available.
Well, it was my experience that the two inquests were absolutely, totally different. My oldest son's was in October, and it was in a modern building that was open from 8 o'clock in the morning. It had got a room for the families, it had got a free drinks machine, it had got tissues on the table for everybody, jugs of water for everybody. And it was just first class, you know, with a coroner's assistant who was there to look after us. And then when we turned up at the other one, we were locked outside in November in the rain till they opened up. There were no facilities, there was no water. It was just dreadful, really dreadful. And they were just 4 weeks apart. One was in October the 13th and the other was November the 13th. And in a month, I experienced what I would say was 10 out of 10, if you can say that, about your son's inquest, and one that was 1 out of 10.
I can't tell you a running order for a typical inquest because there is no such thing as a typical inquest. Every inquest is different.
As the coroner, I am in charge of proceedings, and I will call the witnesses by name. Would they please walk up to the witness stand there, where the court usher will ask them to take the oath.
Normally, one would try to call a family member first, simply to deal with the question of formal identification. Then I normally call the pathologist to give the cause of death and to explain the circumstances regarding the cause of death. And then I simply take the rest of the witnesses in whatever order seems appropriate.
Sergeant Edward Grimmond, please.
The coroner introduced everyone as one by one he called them. He told us who they were. So those people that we hadn't met, he certainly explained who they were and what they were about, which was important.
Take that in your right hand. Read out loud from the card for me.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence that I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Please sit down. Sergeant, would you give the court your full name and your position in the armed forces, please?
Edward Grimmond. I'm a platoon sergeant in the 1st Battalion of the Royal Anglian Regiment.
Right, I'm going to ask you to take a look at this map, please. Mr. and Mrs. Thorpe, can I check you have a copy as well?
Yes, we do.
All right, thank you. Now, I think this is a copy of the plan that you drew up as part of your statement, taken straight after you got back to base after the incident.
I found giving my statement quite demanding. I think largely because you're giving that statement not only to the judge but also to the families, and you're watching and looking and seeing their reactions to some of the things you're saying, which is obviously going to bring home the real fact that these people have died, and in such a horrible way.
And how many people were directly under your charge?
15, sir.
And was Private Thorpe one of them?
Yes, he was.
Had you worked with Private Thorpe before?
Yes, sir. He'd been with me on operations over the past 2 months.
And was it anticipated that you would encounter contact on this operation?
Yes. The possibility is always there.
You can ask questions at the end of everybody's evidence. So a soldier gets called, his name gets called out, he gets taken into the chair, he swears on the oath, and then they go through what happened that day. And the coroner speaks to him, and then they turn to myself and my husband, and they asked, have we got any questions? And I think I questioned every single person that took the chair near enough that day.
But before we conclude, Mr. and Mrs. Thorpe, I would like to ask if you've got any questions.
Yes. When you first saw Mark, could you tell straight away that he was dead?
Yes, I think so, yeah. He was unconscious from the start, so...
Was he in any pain?
I don't think so. As I say, he was unconscious from the start. I'm really sorry.
Thank you.
Also at the inquest, giving evidence was the ballistic expert that explained what kind of bullet it was, where the bullet entered, and obviously what damage it did.
I am Brigadier Hamish Drake. I'm from what is called Defence Materiel within the Ministry of Defence, and it is responsible for equipment.
Also on the day, there was a gentleman there that explained all about the armour.
The role of the subject matter expert is usually to provide some sort of specific evidence about an aspect of the death that is being investigated. I don't think anybody should underestimate how difficult it is to give evidence in an inquest. I have, throughout my career, had plenty of experience of having to speak in public in various places, and yet I found it quite a tough test. It is an emotionally charged situation, and there are bereaved families there who necessarily want to hear answers. And I was very keen myself to try and help them through this process by being able to explain everything that had happened as best I could. You're only there to tell the truth. Firstly, you're under oath. You're not there to present some sort of angle or some sort of position as how you would like it to be.
The important thing is to tell the truth as you see it and to explain the position in a way that helps the court understand the particular bit of specialist knowledge that you have.
Have you examined the pieces of equipment worn by Private Thorpe?
I have.
And there was damage to both the helmet and the body armour?
Yes.
When people started giving evidence, I could understand what they were talking about. It was fairly clear to me, and the coroner's questioning was first class. You know, he always made sure that we were understanding exactly what was going on.
The initial location of my headquarters was actually just at the top of the map.
All right, I see. Mr. and Mrs. Thorpe, just check you're following all of this?
Yes.
Yes. Right, good. So obviously.
So from that point of view, it was very good indeed.
Well, thank you, Major. That'll be all. You can stand down now.
Thank you. Mr. and Mrs. Thorpe, Mark was an excellent soldier. I'm very sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to take this opportunity to express the court's sympathy to Mr. and Mrs. Thorpe for this tragic event that has brought us all here today. Now, why do we have an inquest? Well, when anybody dies a sudden or unexpected death, there needs to be an inquest. An inquest is not a court trial, contrary to the misconceptions of the general public and the media in particular. In many respects, an inquest is merely a very limited inquiry into 4 questions: who the deceased was, when and where the deceased died, and how they died.
At the end of an inquest, the coroner is entitled to record his conclusion, what people call a verdict. He does that either by using what we coroners call short-form verdicts or a narrative verdict.
What is now clear in the light of Major Palmer's evidence is that essentially the unit went into an ambush situation as one section was leaving the compound. Some people who were close to the compound got back in, but a number had to take cover as far as they could, mostly by lying prone on the ground. Now, my conclusion is that Mark David Thorpe was killed unlawfully on the 29th of May 2008 in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, whilst on active service for his country.
Short-form verdict is either accidental death, killed unlawfully, killed by misadventure, that type of thing. A narrative verdict is to simply summarize in 2 or 3 sentences the main facts explaining how somebody came by their death. In many cases where soldiers die as a result of enemy action, I record a narrative verdict, and I would record that he died as a result of enemy action whilst on service for his country. Sometimes when a coroner hears evidence at an inquest, he thinks that there may be improvements that could be made in the things that were done. And sometimes when I deal with army deaths, I think there may be something in army life that could be improved. But I know I'm not an expert on any of those things. And the court, the law recognises that and says that what coroners should do in such circumstances is to write to the appropriate authority. I send copies of my original letter and the response to everybody who's interested. That's the family and all the witnesses. So that's what is generally called a Rule 43 letter. Okay? And that, to my mind, is the correct way of coroners bringing forward change.
I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you to everyone who has taken the trouble to attend. Thank you.
After the inquest, when I had time to think about what was happening, I knew I'd done the right thing. I knew I should have gone, and if I hadn't have gone, I would have been very, very sorry. I thought that I was going to have a little bit of closure, so that if I knew how Darren died and I knew exactly what had happened, it would help me with some of my answers, because there were some answers that I needed.
After the inquest, I stopped asking. I actually stopped asking questions, and I stopped driving people mad. Well, I hope I did anyway. I felt everything that I needed to know, all them questions that had been burning inside, had actually been answered. But you need to ask questions. That's the only way you'll find out. You've got to ask. If you can't ask them, then get somebody with you to ask them.
I would advise them to take someone with them, someone who can look after them. Because you need someone to look after you. You can't take everything in. You know, someone who'll run and get you a drink if you need one, or, you know, someone who's there for you.
I was still left with some unanswered questions, but I've come to the conclusion that I probably won't ever know exactly what the answers are to those anyway.
I got more or less exactly what I thought I was going to get, in that I understood that it was an investigation into the cause of death and that a verdict would be given. And the verdict that was given was the verdict that I expected it to give. So, in that sense, it provided what it was supposed to provide.
I think the main positive that came out of the Coroner's Court was it gave some kind of closure to the families. It's never ever going to remove the pain or the hurt that they're feeling, but it does give them some kind of closure, and I think that's the main positive that you can get from the Coroner's Court.
I would say to families that are just about to go through an inquest, think about what you want to get from the inquest, what questions you want answered during the inquest. And if there's really, you know, some people have very complicated cases and there's a lot of dubiety about things, then contact the coroner's office before the inquest and just be as prepared as you can be, and have somebody with you for support that is able to note things down, because it is really traumatic. So you miss things, or you might interpret things different ways. So you need somebody who's going to be able to catch absolutely everything for you. And if you've got any questions remaining, make sure they're asked before the inquest comes to an end. That's your opportunity, and the coroner certainly gave us ample opportunity to ask lots of questions.
In terms of the role that the soldier has in an inquest, I think it's very important at an early stage to make it very clear to them that they're assisting the family. It's the family's right to know exactly what is going on, what has gone on, and how their son has died.
Nobody else goes to these things. It's not a natural thing. Not everybody does it, and it is scary. And I don't think that whatever I said to anybody would take that away, because although I lost my son too, their son's their son, and it doesn't matter what anybody says. You're still going to worry about it. You're still going to be concerned, and you're still going to be going through an experience that no one else will have gone through, because that is your son.
You knew there was a possibility that he might not come home, but it's important in your mind for your future and for the rest of your families to know what happened. And hopefully with us, we have grandchildren, hopefully James will always be their hero.